Good afternoon. Yes, final session of the day, right? Thank you, Ada. Thanks for the invitation. It's great to be here in Hong Kong today. It's also wonderful to have heard so much of what's going on in K through 12, in primary and secondary education. I would say to the folks who were with us earlier that did not join us for this section that that stuff is great. We need that. We need more of it. But we need to do even more in terms of changing and improving our university level education. I think about either here, I think about in the United States, where I'm originally from, the amount of change, improvement, reform that is happening or has happened in primary, in secondary space. In some places considerable. A lot of good things happening, right? Over the past, say, several decades. However, our tertiary, our universities, the greatest universities around the world, be it in this country, other places, have not changed as much. There's not as much going on. You know, for some reason, maybe people think that the older students get, that the older the model of education that they should be receiving. Yeah, they should be. But let's talk a little bit about more how we might want to prepare students for a modern world. Again, at a tertiary level, right? At a university level. University may not be suitable for everybody, but for those of you who want to go for it, we believe there are better ways to build this model, make this model, right? We know that, listen, regardless of where you're talking about, talent knows no bounds. Whoops, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So talent knows no bounds, right? There's smart students everywhere, right? But yet, our traditional great universities are failing to prepare them effectively for a modern world. We heard a lot about this earlier today and just now, right? Here's a nice statistic that I always share. Even though most universities, presidents, deans, faculty, administration of universities, they really do believe that their institutions effectively prepare their students, their graduates, for the modern world, right? When that same question is asked of the people that are going to hire them, right, it becomes a little bit of a different situation, right? Most of us here, most people here have been to university? Yes? No? That's a valid question. I mean, not everybody, in some places, and very few people have been to university, right? I know, certainly from my own experience, this gap, I have some very, personal experience with this gap, right? And we talked a little bit about this earlier today. There are reasons as to why, right? Why that gap exists. Because there's certain abilities and skills, right, that are necessary, that we need to be able to apply, right? Regardless of what we do, right? Whether we're biochemists, or whether we work for the government, or whether we work in business or in the arts, or whatever, right? Transferable skills, right? Oh, sometimes they call these 21st century skills. I said these things were useful in the 20th century. They'll be useful in the 22nd century, right? They probably become more useful as information has just become ubiquitous over the past several decades. There's something called the internet. Content tends to be free, right? So other things you have to consider. I believe Ada mentioned this. You mentioned this earlier today. Was this you saying that, listen, most students nowadays, either the ones in university now or maybe the ones still in high school, will end up in jobs, in companies, in careers that don't exist nowadays, right? So how do we go about preparing a world for that? Another way to put it is, how should a university better prepare future innovators, impactful global citizens, right? If you, each of you, could build your own university, do it now in your mind, right? And then think about sort of what some others have done, right? If you could build your most ideal university, what should college look like? Right? So we'd argue this. It's a new era, right? We know most of our great universities, some of the schools I attended, several schools in the United States considered to be some of the traditional top schools. Some of them created, my one alma mater was founded in the final years of the Ming Dynasty. I think that's pre-industrial revolution, right? And yes, it's changed a bit, right? But it still has a ways to go. How about a new approach for our new era? What about wiping the slate completely clean? Starting with a blank sheet of paper, right? What would a university built for now and ideally one flexible and adaptable enough to roll with the punches going forward, what would a school like that look like? I'd say it would have a couple key differences, big differences than the traditional model that you and I are used to. First of all, it will be more global, thinking about students, about where they learn, right? We'll get into each of these in turn. Secondly, in terms of what students learn, there will be a strong focus on practical knowledge. Now, I don't mean pre-professional, I don't mean vocational. This is liberal arts and sciences to the core, what we're doing here. But we'll talk a little bit more about what students could or maybe should be learning. How they learn should be much more active. And finally, when you consider who should be learning, there's a lot more that our great institutions could do, should do, and what we do in terms of increasing the accessibility of this model for students everywhere. Okay. Let's talk about global experience as such. Talk about global immersion, in fact, right? So normally we're used to university, right? Be it a university in Hong Kong, be it a university in the UK, be it a university in Poland. And it's usually based in one place, and students spend time in one place, right, on a traditional campus. What about if students experienced the world and lived in 7 different cities and countries in 4 years? Right? And at Minerva, all students spend their first year in San Francisco, right? But then afterwards, they spend a semester each in Berlin, in Buenos Aires, in Seoul, in Hyderabad, in London, and in Taipei, right? And here's the thing. I just mentioned just now, you say, oh, Minerva doesn't have a campus. Yeah, you could say that. You could also say, we do have campuses. We have 7 of them to start. They're called San Francisco, Berlin, Buenos Aires, right? We use these cities as our campuses, right? That's right, we don't build a traditional pretty, campus with a wall around it, right? Why? Because amazing facilities, right? Be them laboratory facilities, be them athletic facilities, right? Be them restaurants, places where students eat, exist in abundance in these major global cities. It's true they don't exist in the countryside per se, right? But if you're in Seoul or if you're in London, right, these things do exist. Why would a great institution go about replicating them? You could. The traditional model is, okay, I'm a university, I have to have everything myself. I need my own cafeteria. I need my own library. I need my own labs. Why? Well, because that's the way everybody does it. Why? Oh, because that's the way we've always done it. Right? Why? And you could say, because that's the way I want to do it, that's fine. Right? But what about if you could better, more effectively leverage resources that already exist? Right? It also is great because it gets students out into the community and helps them develop an empathy and an understanding for other people and other cultures. Right? Using these cities as a campus, not being in a walled campus, right? Particularly one that's maybe far away from a city, right? So another aspect of this global experience is, at least in Minerva, the UC University, it's not just about mainly students from one place, which is what exists where I went to school. I went to one of those schools there. I'll let you guess which one, right? And in my school, and at least in the United States, top-tier universities, on average, allow, graciously so, they think, about 10% of students from outside the United States. 10% of students, on average, non-American, right? Some schools, like Stanford, even less, right? So, no matter how smart you are, if you're from Hong Kong, it's going to be more difficult to get into Harvard because they have a quota, right? What would happen if these schools, what would happen if MIT did not have a quota for anybody? What if they said, yeah, we just want, say, the smartest students, or we just want the richest students, or whatever they want to say they want, right? But they certainly don't discriminate based on how much money you have, where you're from, right? Whether you play a sport well, because that has nothing to do with quality of education now, does it, right? It could perhaps look something like what we have here, right? And that's not a set number either. That's just organically what things have turned out to be. So here's a university. It's a U.S. university. You get a U.S. accredited degree, right? But it's not mainly for American students. It's for students everywhere. Okay. Practical knowledge. What do I mean by practical knowledge? The second big differentiator of this model, right? 2 things. First, I'm talking again about the learning of those transferable skills. Now, here's the funny thing. In the United States, at least, every university, particularly the the big names you've heard of, they say to you, they don't teach people chemistry or history or philosophy. They teach people how to think critically and how to problem solve. No, right? And for those of us who actually been to these institutions, right, you realize it's still content dissemination. What it's been for a long, long time. We heard earlier today there was, back in 1870 in the UK, right, they wanted people to be compliant workers, and so they disseminated some content, to them, had them sit there in the chair, right? It's a different era, right? But what about if a university said, look, there's a lot there in the science of learning and in cognitive science that can inform us of how students actually could learn these skills, right? It's certainly not the way anything's done nowadays, but what about if we could use all of that data and that science from decades of research, and actually have people learn and apply these things, right? What would that actually look like? Well, first thing, it wouldn't exactly look like this, because critical thinking, creativity, these terms that you frequently hear people talk about, they're not just one thing. Critical thinking isn't just one thing, right? It's comprised of many different, call them cognitive processes, right? It's a heterogeneous set of things, right? Abilities, right? And each of these, in turn, is such. So why not break those down? It's exactly what we've done, right? So behind those 4 meta-competencies, those 4 big areas of competencies that you saw, right? Minerva says, listen, we're going to break these down into 120 different habits of mind and foundational concepts, right? Again, cognitive processes. I'm not talking about content yet. I'm talking about ways we can train our ability to think, to apply them to complex problems, to help solve complex problems. And actually, Guillaume and Xiaoning, 2 of our students, are going to talk a little bit more about how they learn that today. It's fascinating. This is what universities should be about, if you ask us. Learning how to think in a structured and purposeful way. Okay, when it comes to content, right, and when it comes to majors and concentrations, yes, this university has those as well, but if you notice, they're much more modern and relevant. They're reflective of how these fields exist in the modern era, right, as they should be. And in terms of curriculum and academic experience, what we've put together is a highly structured and scaffolded, right, curriculum. I say we actually have a curriculum. I say that half jokingly, half seriously. Because most universities in the United States have a menu. 它不是个课程来的，它是个菜单来的, right? I'm sorry I don't speak Cantonese, but sometimes I speak Mandarin, right? It's a menu. You choose this, choose a little bit of that. Maybe some of it's related, maybe not. Some schools, I shouldn't pick on Brown University, some schools, right, don't say it doesn't have to be related at all. We think that's insane, right? So after a strong year of foundation, where you learn those habits of mind and foundational concepts across multiple disciplines, and you can apply them to multiple disciplines, you then begin to break out into more specialization, focus on your majors and such. We can talk a little bit more about this in a bit. Okay, I covered the first 2. The third big differentiator is the idea of actively learning, right? So Minerva students learn in several different ways, and they can give you their 切身经验 in a minute, right? First of all, is in terms of our classroom, looks very, very different than a traditional classroom, right? Attend class outside the lecture hall. We actually don't have any lectures at Minerva. So this is very not Minerva. We don't have a single lecture. If our professors speak longer than 4 minutes, they will be warned. If they continue to do so, they will be fired, right? She's right, right? And there are reasons for this, right? It's all about active learning, right? In fact, our classroom even has a name. It's called the Active Learning Forum. I'll show you in a second what it looks like, right? But what if you could take everything that works in pedagogical science, everything that pedagogical science has proven to be effective, right? And discard everything that doesn't. So that means all small seminar classrooms, right? Fully active learning. That means no lectures, no large classes either, right? What about if you could use technology selectively, right? And to create a much more intimate and engaging and intense classroom environment. What would that look like? Let me show you what that actually looks like. Oh, I have no sound. Is there a reason why I have no sound?
Is the unexpected learning forum, the place where you're constantly engaging with what you're learning.
As a Minerva student, I get to take classes from anywhere in the city.
All of Minerva's classes are taught in the seminar format with a maximum of 18 students.
Everyone agrees that higher education could be much better than it is today. Minerva is acting on that by putting together state-of-the-art technology and superb pedagogy. We have at our fingertips tools that are designed to engage the students 100% of the time.
When you characterize a problem, it's important that it helps guide you to the solution.
Perfect. That's excellent.
In a normal classroom, there's people behind you, there's people to the side of you, but it's nice to be able to see everybody and their reactions to what's being talked about in class.
I feel like I'm in a room with all of my students. I simply forget I'm on the computer. You will be going into breakout groups?
It's the kind of learning where we're an active participant instead of a passive recipient, and it's so much more fun than a traditional class.
We are the only school in the world that uses the science of learning to design not just what we teach, but how we teach it.
Minerva students live and study together. Having that human interaction really strengthens the online class experience.
We can do things with education that has simply never been possible before, and that's what we're trying to do at Minerva.
There's a lot that went on there, and maybe we'll have a chance to discuss some of this in a bit. Keep in mind that it's about active, not passive, right? Oh, I'm running out of time. Let me go a little bit faster. There's several other ways that Minerva students learn, right? In addition to classes and homework and such like this, we also create and curate a number of what we call co-curricular activities, experiential learning in the communities. And one of the great things as students are traveling around the world in these major global cities, we can work with other organizations, governments there, to allow students to either apply themselves or see how others apply these skills that they're actually learning in school. The third way is actually through internships and through research, meaningful internships and research during the breaks. I'm not talking about during the regular school year. I'm talking about during, like, for example, the summertime break. In fact, Minerva has within our institution what we call the Professional Development Agency, which is a group that specifically is there to proactively get access for our students to meaningful opportunities like this. And that's probably the reason why most of our students actually have been doing this in the breaks, right? What's most interesting is the incredible feedback that we've had from those people that they've been working with and working for. Not surprisingly, when you teach students what they actually need to know, right, in a rigorous environment, they have that resilience from traveling around the world and doing this at the same time. The feedback, you know, from those who they're working with or for is that these are students that are operating at a higher level of ability than any other undergraduate college students, not just freshmen. These were people that we asked these people after they were doing internships after their first year in the university at Minerva, right? And this is what the feedback was as being compared to any other undergraduates anywhere at institutions like this and other ones. Okay, so the final thing I'll mention about this model is that it's quite accessible to top students from everywhere. And I say top students because Minerva is at the same time more accessible than any other U.S. institution, and maybe any other institution, period, right? But yet we're more selective than any other U.S. institution at the same time, right? But it's fully merit-based admissions, right? We're looking, like I said, we have no quotas for anybody, right? The process that students actually go through, which looks very different than the traditional process you'd have to go to apply to Yale or apply to Stanford or something like that. Again, on purpose, right, is one that does not benefit, well, it doesn't benefit American students, basically, right? That's one thing to know. And it's all about providing something better than anything that else that exists nowadays for a lower cost, right? That's the other element of accessibility. So we all know, or if you don't know, let me share with you how much it usually costs per year to attend a traditional top-tier U.S. university. Tuition of about $50,000 US a year, plus additional accommodation, and I don't know how much money you want to spend on doing other stuff and having fun. I don't know, maybe $70,000, probably $60,000 to $70,000 US per year, right? But what Minerva has done, right? We can talk more specifically about this in a bit. Tuition is only a quarter of that, right? Even when you add on additional costs for accommodation and living, still comes in under half of what you pay, right? So it's about that exceptional quality. Quality, in our opinion, more ideal, even better than what you can get elsewhere, but for a lower price point, right? Oh, and the other thing is that it's about offering financial aid to everybody who needs it. Minerva meets full need for everybody who requires financial aid. So it's need-based, you know. If you get in, great. And if you need money, the school's going to get it to you. Okay, I had to rush a little bit, but 今天抛砖引玉. Hopefully we're going to have a discussion about this in a bit. Thank you.